For 3 years of marriage, I was treated like an ATM despised by my own husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law. But the day I walked out of that marriage was the day the tables turned. Because the luxury home my sister-in-law was so arrogantly flaunting had never truly been hers. And the moment she shrieked in panic, "The house is being repossessed," was the moment her family began to pay the price. If you're curious about what happened, how a woman could so completely reverse her fortune right after a divorce, and what the real secret behind that house was, then listen to my story. The moment the divorce was final, I immediately took back the villa I had given my sister-in-law. That afternoon, the sky was a bruised gray, the clouds hanging so heavy they seemed ready to burst. I stood on the steps of the county courthouse, the divorce decree still unfolded in my hand. A gust of wind made the paper tremble, a stark reminder that it was well and truly over. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trying, 3 years of enduring, ended with a single signature. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just stood for a moment, took a deep breath, and walked down the steps. Each step felt lighter than the last. Behind me, I heard my mother-in-law's voice. "Finally, it's over." What a relief. A soft, familiar giggle followed. It was Tiffany, my sister-in-law. "Thank God, Mom. We're finally rid of that uptight sister-in-law." I didn't turn around. Not because I couldn't hear them, but because I no longer wanted to. My car was parked across the street. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there without starting the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the face of a woman who had just shed a life she once thought was her happiness. 3 years ago, I married Mark. He was a quiet, gentle man who didn't drink or gamble or cheat. I thought I had chosen the right person. On our wedding day, I walked into his family's life with all the sincerity in the world. I brought not only my love but also my career. A small but stable interior design firm, over $2 million in savings and investments, and a naive belief that I would be loved in return. The first few months were peaceful. My mother-in-law, Helen, was always smiling sweetly. "Emily, we're so blessed to have you in the family." Tiffany was saccharine. "You're so beautiful and successful, Emily. I look up to you so much." And Mark always stood by me, holding my hand tightly. But after just 6 months, everything began to change. I started to notice that whenever I brought money home, no one asked if I was tired or needed to rest. They only asked, "How much did you make this month?" Tiffany became increasingly brazen. She didn't work. She wasn't in school. Yet she lived the life of a pampered princess: weekly spa days, designer handbags, lavish dinners, and whenever she was short on cash, she'd appear before me, her voice dripping with honey. "Emily, could I just borrow a few thousand? I'll pay you back." I gave it to her the first time, the second, and the 10th. Until one day, I overheard a conversation between Tiffany and her friends. In the spacious living room, where I had personally designed every chair and curtain, Tiffany's voice rang out clearly. "Emily? Oh, she's easy. You just have to fake a few tears, and she opens her wallet." Her friends roared with laughter. One of them asked, "Doesn't your sister-in-law know?" Tiffany shrugged. "And what if she does? She has to keep her husband happy, right?" I stood behind the door, my fists clenched, my heart turning to ice. But what hurt more was Mark's reaction. That evening, I asked him, "Do you know Tiffany is using me?" He was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Just let it go, Emily. She's still young." I looked at him, my voice trembling. "And being young gives her the right to disrespect me?" He didn't answer. He just said something I will never forget. "It's not like you're short on money anyway." Those words were a knife to the heart. I finally understood. In their eyes, I wasn't a wife or a daughter-in-law. I was just the one with the money. And then came the issue of the luxury home. One evening, Tiffany broke down in a theatrical fit of tears in front of the whole family. "I can't take it anymore. I want to move out. I want my own house." My mother-in-law turned to me. "Emily, dear, help your sister out. You can afford it." Mark looked at me too. "Just this once, Emily." I sat there, watching them. One feigning misery, one gently coercing, one silently consenting. A week later, I bought a luxury home for $3 million. High-end finishes, prime location. And I had it titled under someone else's name. What no one knew was that when I signed the papers that day, I had already set a plan in motion. Back in the present, I started the car. The engine purred to life as I pulled away from the courthouse. My phone vibrated. It was my lawyer, Mr. Anderson. I answered. His voice was calm and steady. Is everything finalized? I stared straight ahead, my gaze cold. I enunciated each word clearly. Let's begin. On the other end, he simply said, understood. I smiled. A smile I hadn't allowed myself in 3 long years. The smile of someone about to take back everything. The sprawling luxury home, nestled in an upscale gated community, was ablaze with light. Warm yellow lamps illuminated the driveway, reflecting off the polished flagstones, making the entire house look like a 5-star resort. Inside, the living room echoed with laughter and chatter. A massive banquet table was laden with premium seafood, expensive champagne, and fresh flowers. The atmosphere was so festive that anyone passing by would have to stop and stare. At the center of it all was Tiffany, my now former sister-in-law. She wore a form-fitting red dress, a wine glass in hand, her face glowing with smug satisfaction. She raised her glass, her voice high-pitched. Today is the best day of my life. The table erupted in cheers. My mother-in-law, Helen, beamed and nodded. That's right. Our family can finally have some peace. A relative asked. Peace from what? Helen. Helen gave a small, meaningful smile. From someone who never really belonged in this family. Everyone understood. More laughter rippled through the room. In a corner, Mark sat drinking with a few friends. He wasn't saying much, but a faint smile played on his lips. A friend clapped him on the shoulder. Good to be free, man. Now you can do whatever you want. Mark took a sip of his whiskey and didn't object. Back with Tiffany, she sauntered to the middle of the room, did a little twirl, and spread her arms wide as if to embrace the entire house. So, what do you all think of my new place? A friend gushed. It's gorgeous, Tiff. A house like this must be worth millions. Tiffany laughed loudly. I got it for free. Some people just have it all without having to work for it. A close friend leaned in and whispered, Your sister-in-law really is a sucker. Tiffany burst out laughing, not even trying to hide it. If she weren't, how would I have this house? The music grew louder, the party more raucous. No one knew that, in that very moment, a tidal wave was about to crash. Tiffany's phone rang, a shrill tone cutting through the music. She frowned at the screen, an unknown number. She answered, her voice still tinged with annoyance. Hello? On the other end, a man's voice, formal and serious. Good evening. I'm calling from the law office of Mr. Anderson. Tiffany froze for a second. A lawyer? What is this about? The man continued, speaking slowly and clearly. We are officially notifying you that the property at your current address, he paused for effect, has been served with a repossession order. The wine glass in Tiffany's hand trembled. What did you just say? Her voice cracked. The man remained calm. According to the legal documentation, you are not the lawful owner of this property. We will be initiating repossession procedures in the immediate future. Tiffany was stunned. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Crash! The sound was deafening. The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Her mother shot up from her seat. What is it, Tiffany? What's wrong? Tiffany turned to her, her face ashen, her lips trembling. Mom, they said. They said, the house is being repossessed. The air in the room turned to ice. A relative laughed awkwardly. That's a weird prank. How can they repossess a house you're living in? But Tiffany wasn't laughing. She snatched her phone back up, her hands shaking. Say that again. This is my house. The voice on the other end grew colder. Ma'am, we advise you to cooperate. The transfer of deed contained binding clauses, and the true owner has enacted her right to reclaim the property. Tiffany couldn't believe her ears. She screamed into the phone, That's impossible. She gave it to me. The line was silent for 2 seconds, and then a single sentence was delivered that silenced the entire room. You are mistaken, ma'am. It was never a gift. Click. The line went dead. Tiffany stood rooted to the spot. Her mother rushed over and grabbed the phone. Who was that? Who dares say that? But the call was over. A murmur went through the party guests. Some were whispering. Others looked bewildered. Mark stood up and walked quickly toward Tiffany. "What's going on? Explain it." Tiffany turned to him, her eyes red. "Mark, the house. It's not mine." Mark froze. Helen shrieked. "If it's not hers, then whose is it?" The room was silent, and at that exact moment, Mark's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. The caller ID read, "Emily." His heart pounded. He answered. My voice came through the line, calm, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Enjoying the party." Mark's body went rigid. I continued. "You should take good care of the house." I paused, "Because you'll be giving it back soon." The atmosphere in the living room was so heavy it was suffocating. The music had long since died. The half-empty glasses and cold appetizers sat untouched, no one having the appetite for them anymore. All eyes were on Mark. He stood in the middle of the room, the phone still pressed to his ear, though the call had ended. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Helen approached him, her voice trembling. What did she say?" Mark didn't answer right away. He looked around the luxurious house at the walls, the custom sofa, the sparkling chandeliers, things that had filled him with pride just minutes ago. Now, they all felt alien. Tiffany rushed to him, grabbing his arm. "Mark, tell me, what did she say?" Mark swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "She said," he hesitated, "that we have to give the house back." "No!" The shriek was piercing. Tiffany stumbled backward, shaking her head. "Impossible, impossible. The deed is in my name." She ran into her room, frantically rummaging through a drawer. Seconds later, she returned, clutching a folder. Here are the papers. This house is mine." She held the documents aloft as if trying to convince the world, and herself. But no one said a word. Mark walked over and took the folder from her. He flipped through the pages, his hands beginning to shake, because there, on the final page, was a small clause that no one in the family had ever bothered to read. Conditional ownership clause. The grantor retains the full right to reclaim the property if the recipient fails to meet specific, binding conditions of use. Mark read it again, slowly, as sweat beaded on his forehead. Tiffany snatched the paper back, screaming, "What is this? What conditions? I never heard about this." Helen rushed over. "Let me see that!" She grabbed the document, her eyes wide as she read it over and over. But the more she read, the paler her face became. How can this be here?" No one could answer, because none of them had ever read the fine print. At that same moment, my car pulled up in front of a sleek, downtown office building. The glass facade reflected the twilight sky. The quiet, professional atmosphere was a world away from the chaos unfolding in that house. I stepped out, my heels clicking purposefully on the stone pavement. Mr. Anderson was already waiting. He saw me and gave a slight nod. "They've been notified." I offered a small smile. "And their reaction?" He shrugged. "Exactly as you predicted." I wasn't surprised. After 3 years with that family, I knew them better than anyone. They only ever saw the money. They never saw the details. I walked into the law office, sat down, and placed my handbag on the table. My gaze drifted out the window. In the distance, the city was beginning to light up. I remembered the day I signed the papers for that house. I had sat in this very office with Mr. Anderson and said, "I'll put the deed in my sister-in-law's name, but there have to be conditions." Mr. Anderson had asked, "Are you sure about this, Emily?" I nodded. I'm not a fool. I loved Mark. I wanted this family to be happy. But I was never blind. From that moment on, I had prepared my exit strategy. A contract, a tiny clause, a trap they had walked into all by themselves. Back at the house, the scene was one of utter disarray. Tiffany had collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. "No way. She can't do this." A relative whispered, "Maybe she planned this from the very beginning." That comment was like a lightning strike. Helen whirled around. "What are you talking about?" The relative swallowed nervously. "Well, she runs a whole company. She's not stupid." The room fell silent. Mark stood motionless, his expression darkening. For the first time, He was realizing something he should have understood long ago. The woman he had just lost was never as weak as he thought. The phone rang again. This time, it was the lawyer's number. Mark answered. The voice on the other end was formal. "We will be arriving tomorrow morning to discuss this in person. We expect your family to be prepared." Click. No one said a word. There was only one truth slowly dawning on them. This house had never belonged to Tiffany. And worse, this was only the beginning. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant blue, sunlight streaming down on the manicured lawns of the luxury community. But inside the house, the mood was grim. No one had slept. Helen sat on the sofa, dark circles under her eyes, her face a mask of tension. Tiffany was curled up in a corner, clutching the deed like a lifeline. Mark stood by the window, staring out at nothing. No one spoke. No one dared mention what had happened the night before. Then, a black sedan pulled up to the gate. The doorbell rang. Ding dong. The sound made all three of them jump. Tiffany shot to her feet. They're here," Helen panicked. "Don't open it, just don't answer." But the doorbell rang again, persistent and firm. Mark walked to the door, his hand hesitating on the knob for a few seconds before he opened it. A man in a sharp suit stood there, holding a briefcase. He nodded politely. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Anderson, the legal representative for the property's owner." The words landed like a hammer blow. Mark froze. Mr. Anderson continued calmly. "We're here to discuss matters pertaining to this residence." Helen rushed out from behind him. "You've made a mistake. This house belongs to my daughter." Mr. Anderson didn't argue. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. "I'm afraid not, ma'am." He held the document out for her to see. According to the legal title, the true owner is not Miss Tiffany. Tiffany shrieked, "That's not true! I have the deed." She lunged forward, snatching the papers from her mother. "Here, this is the proof." Mr. Anderson glanced at it and nodded slightly. "Yes, this is a deed of transfer." He paused. "But have you read it carefully?" The question made Tiffany freeze. Mr. Anderson flipped to the final page and pointed to a small paragraph. Clause 7, right of reversion. He read each word aloud and clearly. The grantor retains the absolute right to reclaim the property if the grantee fails to meet the agreed-upon conditions regarding use, maintenance, and stated purpose. The room was silent. Mr. Anderson looked up. "Over the past 2 months," he said, gesturing around the room at the lingering evidence of the party empty bottles, scuff marks on the floor, damaged furniture, this property has been misused. Tiffany stumbled back, her face white. "No, that's not." Mr. Anderson didn't stop. "Furthermore," he said, flipping a page, "according to Clause 9, the grantee is prohibited from transferring, leasing, or using the property for commercial activities or for hosting large gatherings contrary to its purpose as a single-family residence." He looked directly at Tiffany. "You have hosted numerous parties here. They were just friends," she stammered. Mr. Anderson nodded. "We have photographs and other evidence." That was the final blow. Helen began to panic. "This can't be happening." "My daughter-in-law gave her the house." Mr. Anderson looked at her, his voice still calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am." He paused. "It was never a gift." The room was deathly quiet. Mark stepped forward, his voice raspy. "What do you mean by that? Explain it." Mr. Anderson met his gaze. This was a conditional transfer agreement. Simply put, the property remained under the legal control of the grantor. And that grantor, he paused for a moment, is Miss Emily Scott. The shock was palpable. Tiffany crumpled to the floor. Helen staggered backward, her hands shaking. "Impossible." "She planned this all along?" No one answered, because the answer was painfully obvious. Just then, the front door opened again. The sound of high heels clicked on the marble floor, slow and deliberate. I walked in. Everyone in the room turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and disbelief. I just stood there, perfectly composed. I glanced around the house I had spent $3 million on, and then my eyes landed on Tiffany. My voice was soft, but it cut like ice. "Nice house, isn't it?" No one dared to answer. I smiled. Too bad it's not yours. The silence in the villa was terrifying. No one was laughing now. I stood in the middle of the living room, my gaze slowly passing over each of them. The woman who had called me a blessed daughter-in-law, the man who had held my hand and promised to protect me, the girl who had sweetly called me the best sister-in-law in the world. Now, they all stared at me with fear. I walked slowly toward the remnants of last night's party. Leftover champagne, shards of a broken glass. I picked up an empty flute and twirled it. Looks like you had a good time. No one answered. I set the glass down. The soft clink echoed through the room, making them all flinch. I turned to my former mother-in-law. Helen, do you remember the day I married into your family? She froze, unable to speak. I answered for her. That day, you said I was a blessing. I paused. But 6 months later, I became your wallet. Helen stammered. Emily, I didn't. I held up a hand, silencing her. You don't need to explain. I turned to Tiffany. She was still on the floor, her face a pale mask. I walked closer, bent down, and looked directly into her eyes. Do you remember what you said? Tiffany trembled, unable to meet my gaze. I enunciated each word. Emily is such a sucker. Just cry and she'll give you money. The room was utterly still. Tiffany's eyes widened. You heard that? I smiled faintly. More than once. I stood up straight. Did you know, Tiffany? Every time you faked your tears, I knew. She shook her head repeatedly. No, it can't be. I ignored her and turned to Mark, the man I once loved. He stood there silently, unable to look at me. I walked up until I was right in front of him. And do you remember what you said to me? Mark slowly lifted his head, his eyes filled with guilt. My voice was as calm as a frozen lake. It's not like you're short on money, anyway. The words hit him like a physical blow. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I let out a short, mirthless laugh. Sorry? I shook my head. For 3 years, you never once stood up for me. For 3 years, I fought against your entire family alone. I paused. And now you say you're sorry. Mark was speechless. I turned back to face all of them. You all thought I was a fool. No one answered. You're right, I said, nodding. I was a fool for believing in something you called family. The air was thick with tension. I took a few steps, stopping in the center of the room, but I was never foolish enough to let you take everything from me. I looked directly at Helen. You thought I bought this house out of love for Tiffany? Helen was silent. I gave a small, cold smile. No, I bought it so I could see your true colors. No one dared to breathe. I turned to my lawyer, Mr. Anderson. He nodded. Let's proceed. Mr. Anderson opened his file, his voice clear and official. As per the owner's request, we are formally announcing that this property will be repossessed. You have 72 hours to vacate. Tiffany screamed. No, I'm not going anywhere. Helen was hysterical. Emily, you can't do this to your family. I looked at them, my eyes empty of any emotion. Family? I repeated. When have any of you ever treated me like family? No one could answer. I turned and walked toward the door. My voice rang out, cold and final. 72 hours. Pack your things and get out of my house. The door opened, and sunlight flooded in. I stepped outside without a backward glance. Behind me, a $3 million house and the family who had taken me for granted were beginning to crumble. The moment the door closed, a suffocating silence fell over the house. Tiffany remained on the floor, her head in her hands, muttering, "This can't be happening." My mother-in-law, unsteady on her feet, stumbled back and collapsed onto the sofa, her expression vacant. Mark stood frozen like a statue, his eyes empty. No one spoke, but they all understood. They were about to lose everything. 10 minutes later, Tiffany shot up, her eyes wild with panic. No, I have to find her. She bolted for the door before anyone could stop her. Outside, the sun was bright and harsh. I had just reached my car when I heard a voice cry out behind me. Emily! Emily! Wait! I stopped and turned. Tiffany was running toward me, out of breath, her hair a mess. The arrogant woman from last night was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked girl. She stopped in front of me and, without a word, dropped to her knees. Thud. The sound was dull and final. She sobbed. Emily, I was wrong. I'm begging you, please don't take the house. I have nowhere else to go. I said nothing. She pleaded. I'll pay you back. I'll get a job. I'll do whatever you say. Please, Emily, anything. I just stood there, watching her. For 3 years, I had been in her position, pleading for understanding, but no one had listened. Just then, Mark and Helen ran out. When Helen saw Tiffany kneeling, she too rushed forward, trembling. Emily, dear, her voice broke. I'm begging you, please don't do this. Then, she too, slowly sank to her knees. Thud. 2 people, kneeling before me. Mark stood behind them, his face etched with pain. He stepped forward. He didn't kneel, but his voice was low. Emily, I know I was wrong. I'm asking you, please, give my family another chance. I looked at each of them. The one who despised me, the one who used me, the one who stood by silently while I was hurt. All of them, now begging me. I took a breath and spoke, my voice quiet but every word sharp. Get up. The 3 of them froze. Tiffany looked up, tears in her eyes. Emily, you'll forgive us? I looked down at her. I didn't say I'd forgive you. The air turned to ice. I took a step closer. You want to stay in that house? I paused. There are conditions. They all looked at me, a flicker of hope in their eyes. I spoke slowly. First, from now on, you will pay for all living expenses, repairs, and maintenance on the house yourselves. Helen nodded frantically. Okay, we agree. I continued. Second, I looked directly at Tiffany. You have 1 month to find a steady job. Tiffany nodded quickly. I'll do it. I'll get a job right away. I paused for a few seconds before delivering the final condition. The tension was palpable. I looked straight at Mark, my gaze like steel. And you, I paused, have to move out. All 3 of them were stunned. Mark stood rigid. What did you say? I didn't repeat myself. I just looked at him. That's the condition. Helen was aghast. You can't. He's my son. I turned to her. Then you can all pack your things and leave. No one could say another word. Mark stood there in silence for a long time, his expression unreadable. He understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a choice. Finally, he lowered his head, his voice heavy. I agree. Tiffany burst into tears. Helen collapsed in a heap, and I just turned and opened my car door. Before I got in, I said one last thing. And don't forget, I'm not part of this family anymore. The car door shut. As I drove away, I left behind a family just beginning to understand the price of contempt. As my car disappeared down the street, an unnerving silence settled over the driveway. Mark stood motionless, his eyes following my car until it was gone. He didn't run after me, didn't call out. For the first time, he knew he had lost the right. Behind him, his mother was still slumped on the ground, and Tiffany was sobbing, but he didn't turn back. He walked slowly back into the house. The villa was still magnificent, but it no longer felt like his. He passed the debris from the party, the broken glass, the cold food, a gallery of their mistakes. He walked up the stairs, each step heavy, and went into the master bedroom. It was spacious and tidy, but it felt empty, because she wasn't there. Mark stood in the middle of the room. Her side of the closet was empty. Her makeup was gone from the vanity. He opened a drawer and found a small box. Inside was a single photograph from their wedding. In it, Emily was smiling, her eyes full of hope. He was smiling too, a smile he couldn't remember having since. He sat on the edge of the bed, a wave of memories washing over him. The mornings she'd woken up early to make his breakfast, the times he was struggling financially, and she'd quietly given him money without a word. The times his mother had been cruel, and she had silently endured. The times his sister had been outrageous, and she had held her tongue. And what had he done? He had stayed silent, always silent. He remembered his own word, it's not like you're short on money anyway. He closed his eyes, his fists clenching. For the first time, he truly hated himself. "Mark, get down here," his mother's voice called from downstairs. The bedroom door burst open. Helen stood there, her face tense. "What are you still doing in here? She's about to throw us all out." Mark didn't look up. "Mom," he said quietly. "We were wrong." Helen froze. "Wrong? She's our daughter-in-law. To do this to us is disrespectful." Mark looked up, his eyes weary. "No, we were the disrespectful ones." Helen was speechless. Mark stood up. "For 3 years, what did she do for this family? Do you even remember?" Helen was silent. "And what," he paused, "did we ever do for her?" Tiffany walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "Mark, are you really taking her side?" Mark looked at his sister, his gaze for the first time holding no indulgence. "Did you ever once treat her like a sister?" Tiffany froze. "Or was she just your ATM?" The words hit her like a punch. He turned and opened his closet, pulling out a suitcase. Helen panicked. "What are you doing?" "I'm packing," he said, his back to her. "I already agreed." "No, you can't leave," Helen pleaded. Mark paused. "If I don't leave," he said, not turning around, "then I'm not a man." The sentence hung in the air, silencing them both. Mark zipped his suitcase and walked past his mother and sister. Neither of them dared to stop him. He walked out of the house and stood for a moment, looking back at the villa he once thought was his. Now, it was nothing. He walked away, slowly but with resolve. For the first time in his life, he had to take responsibility for himself. And for the first time, he understood that the woman he had lost was the only one who had ever been truly loyal to him. But he had realized it far too late. A week later, the city glittered below, a sea of lights. On the 18th floor of a Class A office tower, in a chic, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows, I stood looking out at the skyline, a cup of coffee in my hand. I was no longer the long-suffering wife, the silent daughter-in-law. I was myself again. "Emily, the contract for the new development project is signed." My assistant, Maya, said excitedly behind me. She placed the folder on the table, beaming. "It's a $20 million deal." I nodded slightly. "Good. No excessive joy, no surprise. This was the life that was always meant to be mine." "I just don't get how you put up with all that for so long," Maya said, her admiration clear. I smiled faintly. "Because I used to believe. In love, in family. Now, I just believe in myself." At that same moment, in a cramped, stuffy studio apartment across town, Mark sat alone on a lumpy mattress. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired. His unpacked suitcase sat in a corner. He had no air conditioning, only a rattling fan. He gave a bitter laugh. This was the first time in his life he had to live on his own terms. His phone buzzed. A text from a friend. "Heard your ex-wife is a big shot now. Her company is even hiring." He stared at the screen, the image of me in my sleek, powerful office flashing in his mind. He muttered, "It turns out she never needed me." Back at the villa, Tiffany stared at her reflection. No more designer dresses, no more flawless makeup. She wore a simple t-shirt, her face drawn. On the table was a stack of job applications. She looked at them, her hand trembling. Helen sat in the living room, silent. There were no more orders to give, no more complaints to make, only emptiness. Back in my office, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Miss Scott? This is a partner from a major investment group in New York. We'd like to discuss a $50 million collaboration." I smiled. "I look forward to our meeting." I hung up. I hadn't lost anything in that marriage. I had only gotten myself back. And this time, I would never let anyone disrespect me again. 3 weeks later, Mark stood outside my office building. His shirt was old, his pants creased. He had been standing there for a long time, looking up at the tower he never thought he'd have to enter. On the 18th floor, Maya entered my office, hesitant. "Emily, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." "Then tell him to make one," I said without looking up. He said, "You'd want to see him. It's Mark." I put my pen down. A few seconds passed. "Send him up." 5 minutes later, Mark walked in. He stood there, and I sat behind my desk. The few feet between us felt like a chasm between two worlds. "Emily," he began, his voice hoarse. I didn't reply, my expression neutral. "How have you been?" he asked. I nodded slightly. "I'm fine." My formal tone made him flinch. He struggled for words. I spoke first. "Why are you here?" "Mark?" He took a deep breath. I came to apologize. I know I was wrong. I didn't protect you. I let you suffer alone. His voice cracked. I regret it. I looked at him, then let out a small, cold laugh. You regret it? I stood up and walked around the desk. Do you regret losing me? I paused. Or do you regret losing the lifestyle I provided? He was stunned into silence. You see? I said. You don't even know what you're regretting. No, he said quickly. I regret losing you. I looked him straight in the eye. You never had me. The words cut him deep. Emily, give me another chance. I shook my head. No. I don't go back to a man who stood by and watched me get hurt. I'll change, he insisted. You should change, I said softly. But not for me. He bowed his head. Then at least let me start over with you. I paused. If you had met me now, as the man you are today, maybe, but we have a past, and it's not one I'm willing to revisit. He finally understood. He had truly lost me. He turned and walked to the door. Before he left, he stopped. Emily, he said, not turning around, thank you for everything. The door closed. I returned to my desk and went back to work, as if nothing had happened. Because the past belongs in the past. A month later, the atmosphere in the villa was suffocating. The house, once filled with laughter, was now eerily silent. On her laptop, Tiffany stared at an online investment site, promising high returns. She was desperate. The bank was calling about the loan, rent was due, and the pressure was mounting. She bit her lip and transferred the last of her money, $200,000. An hour later, the website was blank. The hotline was disconnected. The phone fell from her hand. Mom! She screamed, running into the living room. I've been scammed. The money is all gone. At that exact moment, Mark's phone rang. It was the bank. They were beginning foreclosure proceedings on the house, which Tiffany had used as collateral for a massive home equity loan she never told anyone about. The world came crashing down. That evening, they stood outside my door in the pouring rain, drenched and shivering. Tiffany fell to her knees. Emily, save me! Helen wept. Please, I'm begging you. Mark stood behind them, his head bowed in shame. I looked at them for a long moment. My voice was quiet, but it carried over the rain. Have you? I paused, still not learned anything. They froze. Money doesn't appear out of thin air, and in life. I paused again. There are no shortcuts. I took a breath and delivered the final verdict. This time, I'm not helping you. The door closed, and this time, there were no more chances. The foreclosure went through. The house was sold. A month later, in a small stall at a local market, Tiffany was selling clothes, her voice hoarse from calling out to customers. For the first time, she was learning the value of $1. At a construction site, Mark worked under the sun, his hands calloused. He wasn't forced to be there. He chose it. He was learning to rebuild his life from the ground up. In a small apartment, Helen sat quietly, the arrogance gone, replaced by a quiet understanding of all she had lost. As for me, I stood in my newly opened flagship showroom. It was bustling with clients. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. I'm sorry, and thank you. I read it, then turned off the screen without replying. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. I had lost a marriage, but I had found myself, and that was all that mattered. Half a year later, life had settled into a new normal. At the market, a customer commented on how much Tiffany had changed. She smiled. I'm learning how to be a grown-up. At his new job, a junior position he earned at my company through hard work, Mark was asked if he regretted his past. He looked out the window. I do, he said. Not so I can go back, but so I never make the same mistakes again. One afternoon, I visited a project site and saw him there, confidently instructing a crew. Our eyes met. He walked over. Miss Scott, I nodded. You're doing good work. A small smile touched his lips. Thank you. He hesitated. I don't expect a second chance, he said quietly, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. I'm glad you do, I replied. And that was enough. We were no longer ex-spouses. We were just two people who had grown from our past. That evening, I stood on my balcony, looking at the city lights. I thought about it all: the wedding, the pain, the divorce, the final confrontation. It felt like a movie, but this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the one who made the choices. I smiled, not because I had won, but because I hadn't lost myself. The lesson from this story is that kindness given to those who don't deserve it becomes a weapon they use against you. Endurance without respect is not sacrifice, it's self-harm. People who don't value you will only understand what they had when it's gone. And most importantly, walking away isn't failure. It's choosing yourself. Life has no shortcuts, and karma, whether it comes sooner or later, is always just. Sometimes, the greatest help you can give someone is to not help them at all, so they can finally learn to stand on their own.